Hi, I'm Kristen Cox. It's such an honor to be here today with the SAPIX conference, and thanks to Jenny Froome and her team, Cindy and others for inviting me. This is a great group. You guys are super smart people. I hope I can provide some value to your whole world of supply chain today. I want you to look at this slide, and today I'm going to talk a lot about the idea of the illusion of progress. We're really busy. We're bombarded by problems left and right. The supply chain industries, certainly felt stressed during the COVID pandemic. Lots of discussions of what the future will look like. We feel often that there's a million problems to solve. Here's a list of some interesting problems that seem pretty common in the supply chain world. Ernst & Young here in the United States surveyed major supply chain experts. 84% of them said the biggest problem was visibility. Others said it's disruption and time to get back on track after disruption, risk. Many talked about the managing complexity in a global supply chain environment and how difficult that is. Lots of problems we could try to solve. But the question is this: we have limited time, we have limited attention, we have limited ability to focus our resources and the energy. And if that's true, of all the problems we could solve, what are the problems that really matter? I talk a lot about this in our book, Stop Decorating the Fish, and it's this idea that most problems actually aren't worth solving, at least initially. And how do we as organizations and leaders find the leverage point? The thing that if we did that thing really, really well, and we wouldn't compromise, we could get breakthrough results. Now, before I get into what I call the seductive seven, these things that we do that really, really distract us from focusing on the core problem, I want to talk about two problems we have when trying to find the problem. Number one is this unwillingness to challenge basic core assumptions, right? For example, in supply chain, the assumption that I can either have a resilient supply chain close to the customer, or I compete on cost. It's a false choice. The question is, how do we do both? I learned this a lot. I'm blind, by the way, so I'm trying to look in the camera. I hope that's working. But my mentor, when I was going blind, taught me such an important lesson. A lot of people thought about blindness was that you couldn't see anymore. You couldn't be independent when you traveled. You couldn't read print anymore. And he said to me this one thing. He said, Kristen, the biggest problem with blindness is not blindness, but the negative beliefs and stereotypes we have about it, what we believe, and when we're unwilling to challenge assumptions about what blindness means and what it prevents us from doing or doesn't prevent us from doing. Our mindset and our willingness to challenge the most core assumptions, false choices, can we overcome obstacles, can we remove barriers in our flow, is so critical. And I'll give you lots of examples today of where people did really interesting work in that space. The second thing about finding the real problem matters is that we have to understand the goal. In all of my work, looking at a lot of supply chain issues, it's very interesting. Lots of discussion about words of integration and visibility and complexity and predictive forecasting. Didn't hear a lot of talk about specific targets. How do you bring your supply chain from 6 months to 2 weeks? What does your disruption plan really need to look like? Can you remove 25% downtime from your supply chain if there's disruption? Here's a really interesting story. Chuck Yeager here in the United States was the first person to break the sound barrier, to travel faster than the speed of sound. He broke this in, I think, 1947. And as he would he'd get in his plane and he would fly faster and faster. The sound waves that were still traveling faster than the plane would build up in front of him. And it wasn't until he started to approach his goal of breaking the sound barrier did he realize the problem they had to solve. As soon as they hit the sound barrier, the plane became very unstable, a lot of drag, and it couldn't break the sound barrier. They went back and they knew they had to re-engineer the plane in such a way that could break the sound barrier. Why do I show this? Until they had a very specific goal, break the sound barrier, they didn't even know what the problem was to solve. They didn't even encounter the sound barrier until they tried to achieve a goal that seems so difficult to achieve. Too often I see organizations jumping to solutions, jumping to change, to new strategic initiatives, to restructuring their supply chain, and we're missing two key ingredients. What's the goal and what's really blocking us from achieving it? And I want to go through the rest of my talk today, going through a list of what's the seductive seven. And these can be really good indicators for you if your organization or you as a leader or important part of this your organization, if you're jumping to these solutions, you're probably missing the bigger leverage point. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do, but when we know what not to do, we have a fighting chance. So here's a list of the seductive 7. These are common private sector and public sector and nonprofit. They're everywhere. And these are basic beliefs and solutions we jump to. So we believe we have an issue with money, right? And we'll talk about cost cutting and competing off costs in a second. So we have money. We need more money, and we either get that through more budget or reducing costs. We believe that we need more data, right? Visibility. I can see every transaction in my supply chain. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about a little bit about reorganization. We'll talk about the idea that we need new technology, right? Lots of technology out there today. Not saying that technology is bad, but technology is a tool. How do we know when to use it? We think we need new strategy. If we just had a different idea, that would solve our problem, right? A whole different direction. We're going to offshore and use a global supply chain, and now we're going to pivot. I see organizations coming out with new strategic plans all the time, and it's always a red flag for me. Or we believe that we need more training. If we just could convince or train or persuade or do a better sales pitch, somehow that would change behavior. And then finally, this idea of blaming or accountability, that somebody else is responsible for my ability to make an impact in my organization, either a government or my organization, or issue with flow or access to raw materials. Something out there is preventing me from making progress. And it's a power of weakness when we go from there. So I'll go through each of these, spend a little time talking about the mindset and what some really interesting case studies are that shows how we can overcome this. Okay, let's dive into the first one of the seductive 7. And by the way, we use the word seductive on purpose. They're very alluring. Everyone around us is doing it. They seem really obvious. And it's not that these seductive 7 are bad things. They're tools, they're tactics, but by themselves, they're really never going to give us the breakthrough results we want. And we just end up being in red ocean, competing in the same way that everybody else is competing, a race to the bottom, and we don't have breakthrough results. So let's talk about more money. This shows up in different ways. Often people think, I need more money, I need more staff, I need actually more resources. A lot of times in the private sector and supply chain, we see a real issue around cost that is competing off cost. We don't have enough profitability, so we need to increase our margins by reducing costs. We need to become cost competitive, and it can take us down a pretty tricky path. If I, for example, you can look at the slide, focus on costs and reducing costs, then I will often chase the option in my supply chain or in my organizations that provides the least cost. When I do that, I often extend my supply chain, right? Now I'm going all over the world to get my product, my raw materials. I've become more complex. I have a lot more dependencies and failure points in my system. When that happens, I have to purchase a lot of tools to have quote unquote visibility into everything that's going on. Where are things getting stuck? I have to look at tons of different vendors from everywhere around the world, different government policies and tariffs. I've just put so much complexity. I now need tools to manage the complexity. I'm not solving the complexity, I'm just managing the complexity. And that drives up cost. And here we are at the very beginning trying to compete off costs. And in fact, when we compete off costs and think money is the biggest issue, what we often miss is the opportunity cost. What's lost revenue? Think during the pandemic, the idea of just in time, never having more inventory than you need to be cost efficient. What did that do? Think about the areas in the world that really struggled, PPE, hospitals, really driving to just in time, where if sometimes we had enough buffer, we had enough inventory, we could actually withstand ups and downs in our supply chains, and we don't miss out on lost revenue. So often it's the opportunity cost and the complexity that's really making our work more expensive, not less expensive. Now the challenge is we get into this false choice. On one hand, I want to be cost effective, cost efficient. You have to be. You can't be 1,000 times more expensive than your competition. But on the same time, you need a resilient system. A resilient system that's close to the customer, shorter supply chains, shorter lead times, more reliable, all that great stuff. And we think it's a false choice. In fact, there was an article recently from MIT, and they said, we're trying to strike this balance between cost and resilience. I actually disagree with that. I think we can have it all. And it starts with, do you believe you can? Again, remember that mindset issue? What we believe has more impact on the decisions and the actions and the information we filter in and out than anything else. If we start from a position that we have to make a false choice, I guarantee you will make one. But instead, if we expect that we can compete on cost and have a resilient supply chain that's near a customer, I'm not saying that's easy, we'll find solutions. You'll hear me today talk a lot about Tesla, and I use Tesla often because they've challenged core assumptions consistently in so many different ways. It demonstrates what it takes to move through and become kind of a breakthrough organization. But think about Tesla when you're first building your electric car, the supply chain issues, how expensive it could be, and in fact, the battery was very expensive. How do you compete with other cars, combustible engines, with a battery that's super expensive? And you could out of the gate say it can't be done, or you're going to compromise on the quality of the car just so you can cost compete. But he didn't, or Tesla didn't. They assumed they could have both high quality and have a price point that would be reasonable for customer groups. So two things where they started. Start with the Roadster, a high-end expensive car where a $7,000 battery can be hidden in the overall cost. And people at that level aren't going to really squabble over $3,000 or $4,000, and make it a really cool car so that future generations are already tagged as being cool and people want it. He also challenged the whole idea of how do you buy a car, at least here in the United States, right? Instead of going to dealerships, which were expensive, he bypassed all of that so the consumer could buy direct. Again, taking costs off while still maintaining high quality and a resilient supply chain that he always pushes near the customer. The idea that we have to compete off cost or be resilient, I think, is a false choice. It's this idea that money is the thing we need to chase. Where we really want to chase is high quality products that outpace the competition hands down. And if we're doing what everyone else is doing, it's going to be very difficult to stand out of the crowd. So here's the illusion and mindset about money. We have this belief, this idea, that if we just had more money, or a version of that, more margins because our costs go down, we would be okay. And we believe that we're as good as we can get. We've already scrubbed all of the potential options. There's nothing left. We're stuck. We have what we have. And the minute we believe that we are as good as we can get, that obstacles can't be overcome, we can't think of different business models or engineering models, we've lost the game. The mindset we really want to have is that we can always do better. We can always do better. And this is a mindset. And it means that just because we don't know how to do it now doesn't mean it's not possible. I want to tell you a story that my personal life has had such an impact on me. I've shared it often, so hopefully it's new to you. But this really comes back to the mindset issue. So I was going blind. I went to a residential training program for blind people for 5 months. We would wear sleep shades all day, every day. And we'd learn how to use power saws and build furniture and barbecue. And one of the things we had to do to graduate is they put us in a van with our sleep shades on, and they would drive us around the city. We were back in Baltimore, Maryland at the time. And they would drop us off in a random location. We'd have to find our way back on our own to the training center. And we had our blindfolds on. We could not ask anyone any help. We could ask one question along the way. Otherwise, we had to figure it out on our own. We did have a Braille compass. And that seemed to me, of all the things I was learning about blindness, the scariest one. And my teachers would every day work with me. We would go outside, take buses, and go downtown and practice what we call cane travel as a blind person. How do you travel independently? One day, my teacher took me to a park across from the training center. And this park was very difficult to navigate. I knew where I was. I could feel the sun. I could hear the freeway. I knew where I was, north, south, east, west. But I couldn't get out of the park. I would walk, and then I would hit a bench because the sidewalks were really windy, right? They weren't straight. And then I would walk, and I'd hit dirt. Then I'd step back. Then I'd walk, and I'd hit grass. And I finally just stopped walking because I was so frustrated, and I was really discouraged. I'm like, this can't be how it is to be blind. And my teacher was great. He just gave me enough rope to hang myself, and he would let me struggle. And finally, after a while, when he saw I was stubborn and not moving, he came up behind me and said something that changed my life, and I hope it impacts yours as well. This is credit to Tony Cobb. He said, you've got to learn to walk through your uncertainty, through the unknown, through your fear. Because no new information comes from standing still. It's when you walk into the unknown that you get the new information. Because it is true. When I would walk and I hit a bench, I'd realize a bench is there. And then when I'd walk more and hit grass, I realized that grass was there. And over time and with patience and diligence and perseverance, I got my way out of that part. Why is this important here? Just because you don't know yet how to have a resilient market and be cost efficient, just because you're not sure how to make shorter lead times, doesn't mean it's not possible. It means we just don't know how yet. I've seen too much literature out there today talking about all the obstacles in supply chain, and that's great. But the leaders who will excel is they recognize the obstacle and they're committed to breaking it. All right, let's go to the next one of the seductive 7. Okay, let's talk about more data. The second one in the seductive 7. This one is interesting because everyone wants more data. In fact, in government, I worked for Governor Herbert and ran the budget and operations for the state and the Office of Management budget. And I would say government has more data today than any time in its history, and it's not that much better. All right, so think of this. Einstein, pretty smart guy, when he thought through this whole idea of the theory of relativity, he didn't start with a big data dump and have visibility into all the data. He started with a question. And the question was, what would it be like to travel on a beam of light? And he contemplated that question for years. And then that's how he developed his hypothesis, which then they would go get data to test to see if the hypothesis was true or not true. Sometimes get worried that we've lost our ability to think because we just hope somehow the data will reveal itself. And in fact, I've done lots of stuff with data, and we like to forecast and we like to predict. We would do the quote unquote revenue forecast for the state. How much revenue will the state get? And if there's one thing I know, all forecasts are wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong, right? So we can either try to forecast our future or create it. Data can be important, but think about it. They're just words and numbers. That's all they are. And what we really need to think about are what are the right questions we need to ask, right? What's my customer tolerance, right? How much time are they really willing to wait? What are the blockages to the flow? Where do I really need to focus my energy and break the constraint? Without having the ability to think clearly and ask the right questions, we can get lost in a sea of data and quickly lose our way. Here's the illusion. We often believe that the more data we have, the more reality will reveal itself, right? That somehow the breakthrough is just hidden there. And I'm not saying you can't do some data mining and find some important, insights, but the big insights, the ones that will break you into a whole new level of performance, aren't in the data. They're in how you think and the questions you ask. The mindset we really need to have is what are the questions we need to ask, right? And when we ask the right questions, for example, how do I have both a resilient customer proximate supply chain and be cost competitive? Those are more interesting questions. And then the data can be very, very useful. Let me give you an example. Look at this chart. This is a very, very simple system. A, B, C, D, E. Super simple. I know no one's work is this easy. But you can see that each function in this system, the work comes in, it goes to A, moves through B, C, D, E, comes out. You can see that each step has a different amount of capacity, which is true in our systems, right? And I could get tons of data on every step, but you can see like A can do 20 units an hour, B can do 16, C can do 10, D can do, I think I have here 20, 18, 14, you guys can read it. And I can study and analyze and get tiny transactional data for every one of these steps and analyze it to death. But here's the truth. The system is only as effective as its constraint. How much can this system really produce? 10. I put 100 units of work in. A can only do 20. It passes it off to B. B can only do 16, passes it off to C. C does 10. I have all this inventory building up. C does 10, and even though D and E can do more work, it passes off 10, and that's all they do. We don't need visibility. We need visibility on the right things. That's what matters. Collection of data for the collection of data alone can create a lot of noise in our systems and make it very difficult to really hear the signal. Let's give an example of this, of what happens when we're really good at using data the right way to shorten lead times. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the company Zara, who has a fantastic history and track record out there about shortening their supply time. Their competitors, and many in the apparel retail market industry, rely on better and better forecasting and better predictive models to understand where the disruption could be, how long is it going to take for something to get here. And on average, let's just look at the comparisons. Instead of Zara asking about more data to forecast the future, Zara says, how do I shorten my supply chain? And because they asked the right question, they knew where to focus. They didn't try to react to the future. They created their future. And here's what the results are. You look at this chart. Zara is about a 2-week from design to store lead time. The industry average, 6 months. You can look at how much money or how many products Zara has to liquidate at the end of season compared to the industry, right? It's just Zara dominates time and time again because they ask the right question. Think about forecasting. When you're in the apparel industry and it takes you 6 months to get your product from A to the store, you've really got to forecast. But the problem is you don't really know the customer design or the customer demand until about 2 weeks into the season. So you're trying to predict out what you think customers will want because your lead time is so long, so you buy more and more sophisticated and complex forecasting models, and you create a lot of complexity in your system to predict what customers will want. And what do we know? You can't predict what customers want all that good. Maybe you're close. But in the apparel industry, some of Zara's competition were using 40 different indicators to try to forecast the future. Microclimate, different sports people were playing, demographics, you name it. And all those predictions, you can see the results, didn't give them a competitive advantage. As you really can't know the demand until you're actually in the season. And by then it's too late. You've already purchased a huge chunk of your inventory and you've missed the demand signal. So what do we want to do instead? We want to filter out the noise from the signal. There's a few pieces of data we really need to understand. Where's our constraint? What's blocking us in the flow if we want to be cost competitive and reduce our lead time? And try to strive to not flood our system with data, but to flood our systems with signal and information. One more story from my personal side that illustrates this point. Remember, I told you that I would practice my cane travel when I was at that residential training program. And one day our teacher took us down to this very complex intersection. It's right down at the place called Inner Harbor in Baltimore, Maryland. Very busy, lots of congestion. And there's not just one road to cross. There's multiple roads that come together. And you have to cross one part of the road to get to this little island, and then you cross again. And with so many streets coming in, they had these little chirping sounds for blind people. Many cities have them, so when it's green, it chirps and you can go. But because so many streets were there were these chirping, these computer chirping bird sounds for the blind. Instead of just hearing one, we'd hear tons of them. There was so much noise, I couldn't understand what signal to follow. I didn't know if the one I was hearing over here and over here meant which way I should cross. It was very confusing. I finally had to ignore all of that noise and just listen to traffic. If I wanted to go straight, are the cars to my left going in that same direction? Have they stopped or they started? And that became my signal to listen to. We can do serious damage in our organizations when we believe the solution is, let me see everything. What we want to do is see the things that matter. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, let's talk about more technology, another of the seductive 7. Again, not that technology is bad, it just by itself isn't going to give you the breakthrough. I use technology as a blind person all the time to access the sighted world, but my technology is a very specific tool. Look at this slide here. It's interesting. This Ernst & Young survey I talked about, who surveyed supply chain experts, you can look at the real excitement people have about automation, digitization. 64% said the future is digitizing, and the other 54% is total automated robots for supply chains. Lots of push, lots of focus, lots of momentum. And I'm not saying that those things are bad by themselves. But here's the deal. Technology is just a tool. And if we don't know the specific problem we're trying to solve, we could hardwire a bad process or a bad design or a too complicated supply chain, hardwire it with very expensive technology, and then it's very difficult to be agile and change. What's the problem technology is trying to solve? Again, let me use Tesla as an example, and probably many of you have heard about how they're simplifying how they make part of their car. It used to take, they call it casting, 78, I think, or 80 pieces. Instead, they use a big cast so they can create the base of the car in 4 parts. Huge simplification. So there's less moving parts, less things to connect. It just simplifies the entire supply chain or manufacturing process. Then, and after that, then they talked about robots, right? So they went from 1,000 robots to 300 because you didn't have such a complex process. The first question always with technology is, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Either in shortening my supply chain, or try to become more resilient, or having, better reliability in our lead times and inventory. That is a business flow problem. That's an issue of constraints. That's an issue of not understanding why things are so complex in the first place and accepting that complexity is just how it is, which I disagree with. I think complex means we just don't understand it. Complex is easy. Simple is hard. It's really hard to think about how to actually redesign the manufacturing process to take something from 80 to 4 parts. But if we can think of that then we can use technology to even become more efficient in the process. It becomes, the last ingredient, the icing on the cake to make this thing really work. But the breakthrough results aren't going to be because of technology. It's because we're using technology the right way. I see this in organizations all the time, billions and billions and billions of dollars spent on technology. And at the end of the day, if you look at either their margins or their profitability or their market share, or in government, are they better, faster, cheaper? Very often the answer is no. But we can now manage our complexity with much more apparent ease, even though that's just an illusion. So here's the right mindset in the illusion. The illusion is that we just need a new tool or capability. If we just had this latest, coolest new technology, our problems would go away. We would become competitive. The reality is that we've got to figure out what's flawed in our business model, in the flow of our work, in our policies, what our measures are. Tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I behave. Dr. Goldratt would always say, am I measuring the wrong things that are really reinforcing local optimization? I've improved one part of the system, but the whole system itself isn't improved at all. If I have policies, procedures, operational issues, those are the problems. Then let me figure out how I can use technology to solve those. It can be a powerful tool, but remember, technology is only a tool. Okay, let's talk about more strategy, the next of the seductive 7. Is strategy bad? No. But I'll tell you what freaks me out is when I see organizations coming up with new strategy all the time, the new strategic initiative, the new strategic plan, when they didn't even reap the benefits of their old strategic plan. Consider this. Consider the goal of going to Mars. Pretty big goal, right? And the strategy to get there is to create a spaceship, whatever that is, to get us to Mars. That's not going to change. What will change is all the challenges in execution. How do you create a vehicle where the astronauts are protected from radiation, where the wear and tear of gravity isn't too hard, where you can get there and back with sufficient fuel? How do you get food and water? All of the issues are in execution. But too often we start a strategy, it gets difficult, we come across obstacles, and so instead of going deeper into execution, we change our strategy. Right? We can see this with supply chain. We can see it that we're going to restructure. We're going to have new vendor management. We're going to do new kind of stress testing, new kind of predictive. We're changing our strategy all the time, where our strategy shouldn't change that much. Think about going on a vacation. Your goal I'm going to go to vacation to Europe. Now the details are when and where and what's my budget and what am I going to do while I'm there. I don't just say I'm going from Europe to China and change my final destination all the time. The work comes in the execution. So let me give you another example from Tesla. It's super interesting. So, commitment is to create a supply chain near the consumer. I call it a customer proximate supply chain. So near the consumer. And here in the United States, the challenge was that to make batteries, you need lithium. And lithium was being imported from other countries, places like Australia, South America, etc. So that really messed up the whole idea of having a strategy of a consumer proximate supply chain near the consumer, so I can have shorter lead times. What do? Like, where am I going to get lithium? How do they do this? It'd be easy to just change the strategy and say, hey, wait, new idea. We're actually not going to keep a supply chain near our customer. We're just going to go global like everyone else is. But they don't compromise. And this is what's so important. Don't accept bad compromise. So what happens? Figuring out how to mine lithium out of the Nevada desert. Nevada's a state, actually pretty right next to where we live. And to use a cleaner water-based engineering process to extract lithium out of sand, which is cleaner than the way they're getting it now from other countries. Now they can have cleaner lithium, less impact on the environment, and still stay true to their strategy of a supply chain near the customer. The obstacles will inevitably come once you set a strategy. If your goal is really ambitious and you're committed to that, and you understand the problem here, the big leverage point is you can do tons of process improvement, visibility everywhere, but if you don't solve the lithium problem, it's not going to work. We don't just change strategy because we come against an obstacle. Another story around this. So we were in California on vacation a few years ago, staying at a little place, and every morning I love to walk. I love being active. And when I'm in new areas, I walk around one block to kind of get familiar with it, and then I'll go 2 or 3 blocks, and then I'll go larger and larger circles till I get to understand the area. Well, one morning, my family's still sleeping. I get up to go for a walk, and I walk around the block, and I'm coming back around the sidewalk, and there's a car parked right in the middle of the sidewalk. And what do? Hit the car directly, because you don't expect a car to be on the sidewalk. And at first, I'm really frustrated. Like, why would these people park their car right on the sidewalk? And then I got around the car and realized that as soon as I turned, that street was the street I needed. That was our house. So all I needed to do, what I thought was this big obstacle, this big problem, ended up being this awesome landmark. It was a guidepost, because now I could walk as far as I wanted to. I didn't have to count the blocks. I could listen to music and not have to focus. I could walk as far as I wanted to come, hit the car, turn the corner. That's where we stayed. So what I perceived as an obstacle ended up being an opportunity. When you do strategy and you go into execution, you will find obstacles, and sometimes extremely difficult obstacles to overcome. The question is, can you see those as opportunities? Because if you can overcome that obstacle, you will be that much more competitive. You'll outpace your competition, who may not have the perseverance or the diligence or the creative problem solving to figure out the obstacle. That's what will set you apart from the crowd. So here's the illusion of mindset. A strategy that I just need a new idea. That's that's the illusion. If I just had a new idea, a new strategy, my problem would go away. But the mindset we want to have is the challenges are in execution, right? We have to persist. We have to creative problem solve so that we can really unblock ourselves in execution and remove the obstacles that are preventing us from achieving our goal and providing better services to the customer. All right? Okay, we're going to go over just a few more and we'll be done. Okay, the next one in our list of the seductive 7, more blaming and accountability. This one is so fundamental. This is just like the core foundation of all of them. And it's this idea that we can take control and focus on what we control before we try to change everybody else. And let me give you a story about this. There was a car dealership a colleague of mine was working with, and the car dealership, the management leaders were just blaming the salespeople. And here's why. They had a conflict. I can either sell a lot of cars at cheaper rates, get a lot of volume, but less margin for each car, or I can sell fewer cars, but have bigger margin. And they would keep trying to train the people on how to distinguish if they should discount the car or not, or keep the real price. Just tons of friction. And the managers would kind of blame the employees, and the employees, their morale went down because they were frustrated. They didn't feel successful. When managers stopped and said, wait, what's my role on this? What's my piece of the puzzle? Where am I accountable? I'm not going to blame my team for a second. I'm going to blame myself. What can I do? Management came up with a really awesome, simple solution. In the car lot, they put cars that the sales force could discount in some specific designated areas in the car lot, and cars that they could not discount in other areas. The customer didn't know the difference, but it was an easy way to signal to the employees what action to take without blaming them. Very simple change of approach, but it starts with this idea that I don't need to hope or wait or pray that somebody else is going to save me. I've been reading from Martin Luther King recently, and he said something great. Freedom is won, it is not given. And I think that's true for success. The success of your company is won, it is not given. You will confront obstacles. We've talked about that. But the minute you hope and wait that somebody's going to solve it for you is the minute you've abdicated your power. You're starting from a weak position. Focus on the controllables. I talk about this all the time, working with legislative bodies. You go to a legislative body, legislators, and you want them to adopt a change of yours, a new policy, and they don't. And it's easy to get frustrated that those legislators just don't understand and what's wrong with them. But if I reflect and I think, well, what was my role? Maybe my presentation wasn't clear enough. Maybe I didn't really clearly verbalize what the problem is we're trying to solve, the risks and the upside if we solve it. Maybe I spoke too long. Maybe your bosses, they don't have buy-in to your solution and you blame your boss, or your employees aren't doing a great job and you blame your employees. The challenge with that, it doesn't mean people shouldn't be accountable and they don't have a role. But the minute we shift our energy into blaming others, we overlook the great potential we have to do good with what we have. When we start from a place of our own responsibility, extreme responsibility, what do I have stewardship over? What can I actually control and impact? And we start there, you'll find you actually have much more power than you thought you did. We can give a lot of power to the obstacles and to other people, or we can give more power to our goals and the ability we have to make a difference in our work environment and, quite frankly, in the world. So the illusion, we have to wait. Our success is dependent on other people, right? Other people changing their minds. Yeah, it's true, but it's not a great way to live your life. What we really want to do is figure out what do we have stewardship over, take extreme responsibility, and focus on what we can control. And there is a lot you can control if you know where to focus. All right. Now, the last 2 seductive 7, because of time, I'm not going to go through them all, but I want to make you aware of them. The next one is more training. This illusion, you can see the slide. So we believe if people just had more information, right? This is all about marketing, convincing, persuasion, training. If people had more information, they would behave the way we wanted them to behave. It's like putting somebody who wants to lose weight and sticking them in a house full of junk food and say, what's your problem, right? What we want to do is actually change the environment, change the system so it's easy and natural for people to make the decisions we want them to make. Lots of talk right now in supply chain industry about upskilling the workforce, a lot of workforce training and development to deal with automation, etc. Just be mindful in this. Make it as simple and natural for people to do what you want them to do. If you're relying heavily on training and not the process, or not having built-in checklists, or making the technology simple, you're just setting yourself up for problems with your employees. They're going to feel frustrated, and you'll create a lot of failure points. We won't spend too much more time on that, but be aware of it. And the final one is about more reorganization. We have this belief that I need control of all the resources to make a difference. We'll see this with retail outlets, sales, marketing, and production. Things aren't going well, so one group wants to grab and to control all the rest. It's this idea of power. And the reality is that we really need to figure out how to synchronize, align our services, even when they're outside of our control. Because the reality is you'll never control everything, especially in supply chain. You're never going to control the governments or local governments or tariffs or everyone in your supply chain, and you can try to manage contracts with your vendors, etc. But what we really, really want to think about is how do we make it work as much as we can? What are the process issues, the policy issues, the measures that are creating disalignment and making it difficult to synchronize or improve our lead times? Let's figure out that before we reorganize and really upset the organization with a lot of just wasted time and attention. All right, to sum this up, there is so much opportunity in our organizations if we believe it's there. We have to start with the belief, the clarity of the goal, and understanding what problem it is we need to solve. Most problems aren't worth solving, and the breakthrough comes when we redefine the problem, not jumping to a new solution. These seductive 7 are common solutions all of us jump to. They give us the illusion of progress. We've made a change. We successfully implemented an initiative. But at the end of the day, if we don't see significant results in our profitability, our market share, in government, how well we serve the people, cost, quality, impact, we haven't solved the right problem. So be mindful of these seductive 7. See them as tactics, tools, but they by themselves will never, ever be the solution. It's been a pleasure to be with you and looking forward to the Q&A session. Thanks so much. Oh, by the way, slides, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can look for me on LinkedIn. I post a lot there. And you can look at our book, Stop Decorating the Fish, where it just has a lot of case studies here about the seductive 7 and what to look for in your own organization. All right, thank you.